morning rain drummed against the glass windows of the executive office on the 42nd floor, each droplet a reminder of the storm that had been brewing in Marcus Chen's life for months. As he sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports that would determine the fate of 3,000 employees, his face remained as composed as carved stone. The numbers told the story of decline, of necessary cuts, of decisions that would shatter lives and dreams. Yet his hands remained steady, his breathing controlled, his mind crystalline in its clarity. This was not callousness. This was something far more complex, far more deliberate. Marcus had spent years cultivating what psychologists term emotional detachment, a psychological state that allows individuals to maintain objective distance from emotionally charged situations while preserving their capacity for empathy and appropriate emotional response when circumstances warranted. It was a skill that had saved him from the crushing weight of expectation, the paralyzing grip of fear, and the suffocating embrace of others' opinions. The concept of emotional detachment often carries negative connotations in popular discourse, frequently confused with emotional numbness, apathy, or psychological dysfunction. However, the reality is far more nuanced. True emotional detachment, when properly understood and implemented, represents one of the most sophisticated forms of emotional intelligence. The ability to observe one's emotional responses without being controlled by them, to maintain perspective in chaos, and to act from a place of conscious choice rather than reactive impulse. Dr. Sarah Williams, a clinical psychologist specializing in cognitive behavioral therapy, had spent 15 years studying this phenomenon. Her research revealed that individuals who master healthy emotional detachment demonstrate remarkable resilience in high-stress environments, make more rational decisions under pressure, and paradoxically, often display greater empathy than their emotionally reactive counterparts. The detached mind is not a cold mind, she explained to her graduate students during a particularly intense seminar. It's a mind that has learned to create space between stimulus and response, between feeling and action. This space is where wisdom lives. The neuroscience behind emotional detachment reveals fascinating insights into human consciousness. When we experience strong emotions, the amygdala, our brain's alarm system, floods our neural pathways with stress hormones, effectively hijacking our prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thought and decision-making. Individuals skilled in emotional detachment have trained their brains to maintain prefrontal cortex dominance even during emotional storms, allowing them to process information objectively while acknowledging their emotional responses without being enslaved by them. Marcus understood this principle intimately. His journey toward emotional detachment had begun during his childhood in a volatile household where his father's business failures created an atmosphere of constant crisis. He watched his mother succumb to anxiety attacks that left her paralyzed for days, witnessed his younger sister develop an eating disorder in response to the family's financial instability, and observed his father's emotional outbursts destroy professional relationships and personal connections. By age 12, Marcus had made a conscious decision that he would never allow his emotions to control his actions the way they controlled his family's destiny. The path to emotional detachment is neither simple nor without risks. It requires a delicate balance between protecting oneself from emotional overwhelm while maintaining the capacity for genuine human connection. The process begins with developing what Buddhist practitioners call mindful awareness, the ability to observe one's thoughts and emotions as temporary phenomena rather than absolute truths. This observational stance creates what psychologists term psychological distance, allowing individuals to evaluate situations more objectively. Dr. James Morrison, a researcher at the Institute for Advanced Psychological Studies, conducted extensive research on the cognitive mechanisms underlying emotional detachment. His studies revealed that individuals who successfully employ emotional detachment utilize specific mental strategies: cognitive reframing, emotional labeling, temporal distancing, and perspective taking. These techniques allow them to maintain emotional equilibrium while preserving their ability to respond appropriately to emotional cues from others. Cognitive reframing involves consciously altering the way one interprets events. Instead of viewing criticism as a personal attack, the emotionally detached individual might reframe it as valuable feedback or information about the critic's state of mind. Emotional labeling requires identifying and naming emotions as they arise, which activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala reactivity. Temporal distancing involves considering how significant current emotional triggers will seem in the future, while perspective taking requires viewing situations from multiple vantage points rather than remaining trapped in one's immediate emotional experience. The development of these skills often emerges from necessity rather than choice. Many individuals who master emotional detachment do so in response to traumatic experiences, professional demands, or family circumstances that require emotional stability for survival. Military personnel, surgeons, emergency responders, and business leaders frequently develop these capacities as adaptive responses to high-stress environments where emotional reactivity could prove dangerous or counterproductive. However, the cultivation of emotional detachment extends far beyond professional necessity. In an era of constant connectivity, social media comparison, and information overload, the ability to maintain emotional distance has become increasingly valuable for psychological well-being. Research conducted by the American Psychological Association indicates that individuals who demonstrate healthy emotional detachment report lower levels of anxiety, depression, and stress-related physical symptoms compared to their more emotionally reactive counterparts. The process of developing emotional detachment often begins with recognizing the difference between experiencing emotions and being controlled by them. Emotions serve important evolutionary functions. They provide information about our environment, motivate behavior, and facilitate social bonding. The goal is not to eliminate emotional responses, but to develop conscious choice about when and how to act upon them. Marcus's transformation had been gradual but deliberate. He began practicing meditation during his undergraduate years, initially as a stress reduction technique during exam periods. However, he quickly discovered that the mindfulness skills he developed during meditation sessions transferred to other areas of his life. He found himself less reactive during arguments with roommates, more focused during academic presentations, and increasingly capable of maintaining perspective during family crises. The practice of meditation, particularly mindfulness meditation, has been extensively studied as a tool for developing emotional regulation. Neuroimaging studies reveal that regular meditation practice literally rewires the brain, strengthening connections between the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions while reducing amygdala reactivity. Practitioners develop what neuroscientists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about their thinking, to observe their emotional processes without being swept away by them. But meditation represents just one pathway to emotional detachment. Cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, Stoic philosophy practices, and even certain forms of physical training can develop similar capacities. The common thread among all these approaches is the cultivation of conscious awareness and deliberate choice in response to emotional triggers. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome understood the power of emotional detachment millennia before modern psychology validated their insights. Epictetus taught that happiness and effectiveness depend not on external circumstances, but on our responses to those circumstances. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about maintaining emotional equilibrium in the face of political turmoil, personal loss, and the inevitable challenges of human existence. Their teachings emphasized the distinction between what is within our control, our thoughts, attitudes, and responses, and what lies beyond our control, other people's actions, external events, and the passage of time. Modern research confirms the wisdom of these ancient insights. Studies conducted at Stanford University's psychology department reveal that individuals who focus their attention and energy on controllable factors demonstrate higher levels of life satisfaction, professional success, and psychological resilience compared to those who expend emotional energy on uncontrollable circumstances. The workplace provides a particularly revealing laboratory for observing the effects of emotional detachment. In corporate environments where criticism, rejection, and failure are commonplace, emotionally reactive individuals often experience cycles of stress, anxiety, and burnout. They take professional setbacks personally, interpret constructive feedback as personal attacks, and allow office politics to disrupt their emotional equilibrium. In contrast, emotionally detached individuals maintain focus on their objectives, learn from criticism without internalizing it as a reflection of their worth, and navigate organizational challenges with strategic thinking rather than emotional reactivity. Marcus's rise through the corporate hierarchy illustrated these principles in action. While colleagues became embroiled in office politics or paralyzed by fear of making mistakes, he maintained focus on measurable outcomes and long-term objectives. When his initial proposals were rejected, he gathered feedback, refined his approaches, and resubmitted improved versions rather than interpreting the rejections as personal failures. When organizational restructuring threatened his position, he analyzed market trends and skill requirements, rather than wallowing in anxiety about factors beyond his control. This strategic approach to emotional management often creates the perception of coldness or lack of empathy. Critics of emotional detachment argue that it leads to callousness, reduced social connection, and an inability to relate to others' emotional experiences. However, research suggests that the opposite is often true. Individuals who maintain emotional balance are frequently better positioned to provide genuine support to others because they are not overwhelmed by their own emotional reactions to others' pain or distress. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in emotional intelligence and interpersonal relationships, conducted longitudinal studies examining the social consequences of emotional detachment. Her research revealed that emotionally detached individuals often develop deeper, more stable relationships than their reactive counterparts. Because they are less likely to take others' behavior personally, they can respond to relationship conflicts with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Because they are not constantly seeking emotional validation from others, they can offer support without expecting reciprocal emotional investment. The key distinction lies in understanding the difference between emotional detachment and emotional disconnection. Emotional detachment involves maintaining perspective and choice about emotional responses while remaining capable of appropriate emotional engagement. Emotional disconnection involves shutting down emotional responsiveness entirely, often as a defense mechanism against overwhelming pain or trauma. Healthy emotional detachment preserves empathy while preventing emotional contagion. The tendency to absorb others' emotional states without conscious choice. This capacity proves particularly valuable in helping professions where exposure to others' pain and distress could otherwise lead to compassion fatigue and professional burnout. Physicians, therapists, social workers, and educators who master emotional detachment can maintain their effectiveness and longevity in demanding roles while continuing to provide compassionate care. The cultivation of emotional detachment also requires developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately seeking escape through avoidance, distraction, or reactive behavior. Many individuals struggle with emotional regulation precisely because they lack tolerance for uncomfortable emotional states, leading them to make impulsive decisions in attempts to eliminate emotional discomfort quickly. Marcus had learned distress tolerance through deliberate practice. When facing difficult decisions that would affect employees' livelihoods, he allowed himself to fully experience the discomfort of the situation without rushing toward premature solutions or avoiding necessary but painful choices. This tolerance for emotional discomfort enabled him to gather comprehensive information, consider multiple perspectives, and make decisions based on long-term consequences rather than short-term emotional relief. The development of distress tolerance often involves challenging cultural narratives about emotions that suggest discomfort must be immediately resolved, or that experiencing negative emotions indicates personal weakness. Eastern philosophical traditions offer alternative frameworks for understanding emotional experience, viewing emotions as temporary weather patterns in the sky of consciousness rather than definitive statements about reality or self-worth. Research in positive psychology reveals that individuals who can tolerate emotional discomfort without reactive behavior demonstrate greater creativity, problem-solving ability, and decision-making effectiveness. When we are not consumed by the urgency of escaping uncomfortable emotions, we can access broader cognitive resources and consider more innovative solutions to challenging circumstances. The practice of emotional detachment also involves developing what Viktor Frankl called self-transcendence, the ability to find meaning and purpose beyond immediate emotional gratification or avoidance. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and renowned psychiatrist, observed that individuals who could maintain perspective on their suffering while connecting to larger purposes demonstrated remarkable resilience even in the most extreme circumstances. This capacity for self-transcendence often emerges through connecting to values, principles, or purposes that extend beyond immediate self-interest. When Marcus made difficult business decisions, he grounded himself in his commitment to long-term organizational sustainability and employee welfare rather than his immediate discomfort with disappointing specific individuals. This value-based decision-making provided emotional stability and moral clarity even when facing criticism or opposition. The neuroscience of self-transcendence reveals that activities involving purpose, meaning, and service to others activate brain regions associated with reward and well-being while reducing activity in areas associated with self-referential thinking and rumination. This neurological shift can provide natural emotional regulation and resilience even in challenging circumstances. As Marcus sat in his office that rainy morning, reviewing the quarterly reports that would necessitate difficult decisions, he exemplified the principles of healthy emotional detachment. He acknowledged his discomfort with the situation, recognized his concern for affected employees, and felt the weight of responsibility without allowing these emotions to cloud his judgment or paralyze his decision-making process. He had learned that destroying his weak self, the reactive, fear-driven, validation-seeking aspects of his personality, did not require becoming heartless or disconnected. Instead, it meant developing the strength to feel deeply while acting wisely, to care genuinely while maintaining perspective, and to remain human while transcending the limitations of purely emotional decision-making. The rain continued to fall against the windows, each drop reflecting the light in its brief moment of visibility before joining the larger current flowing toward the earth below. Like those raindrops, emotions could be acknowledged for their temporary beauty and purpose, without mistaking them for permanent truths, or allowing them to determine the direction of one's life. This understanding formed the foundation upon which genuine strength, authentic compassion, and lasting effectiveness could be built. Part 2. The Alchemy of Strength. 3 years had passed since that rain-soaked morning when Marcus first implemented the most difficult restructuring in his company's history. The decisions he made that day, eliminating 3 divisions, relocating operations, and reducing workforce by 30%, had initially drawn fierce criticism from employees, media outlets, and industry analysts. Yet as he stood before the board of directors this Tuesday afternoon, presenting quarterly results that showed record profitability and employee satisfaction scores higher than pre-restructuring levels, the transformation seemed almost alchemical in its profound completeness. The journey from that point of crisis to this moment of vindication illustrated the deeper psychological principles underlying emotional detachment and personal transformation. The phrase, "the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," represented more than philosophical abstraction. It described a concrete psychological process through which individuals could transcend the limitations imposed by fear, external validation, and reactive emotional patterns. Dr. Michael Thompson, a researcher specializing in adult psychological development, had spent decades studying individuals who demonstrated remarkable personal transformation. His longitudinal studies revealed common patterns among those who successfully destroyed their weak selves. They all underwent what he termed identity reconstruction, a process involving the deliberate dismantling of limiting beliefs, reactive patterns, and external dependencies that had previously defined their sense of self. This process of identity reconstruction typically began with what Thompson called disidentification, the recognition that many aspects of personal identity are learned, culturally conditioned responses rather than fundamental truths about one's nature. Marcus had experienced this disidentification gradually, beginning with his recognition that his childhood fear of financial instability had been unconsciously driving many of his career decisions. He realized that his intense work ethic, his reluctance to take risks, and his need for others' approval were not inherent personality traits but adaptive responses to early family dynamics. The psychological literature on identity development reveals that most individuals carry forward patterns, beliefs, and emotional responses learned during their formative years, often without conscious awareness of how these early adaptations continue to influence their adult lives. These patterns, while perhaps necessary for childhood survival, frequently become limitations in adult contexts, preventing individuals from accessing their full potential and responding effectively to current circumstances. The process of dismantling these limiting patterns requires what existential psychologists call ontological courage, the willingness to question fundamental assumptions about oneself and reality. This courage enables individuals to examine their beliefs, behaviors, and emotional responses with scientific objectivity, rather than defensive attachment. It requires treating one's own psychology as a fascinating subject for investigation rather than a fixed reality that must be protected from challenge. Marcus had developed this investigative stance toward his own psychology through years of deliberate self-reflection, often utilizing techniques borrowed from cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness meditation, and philosophical inquiry. He began questioning the assumptions underlying his emotional responses. Why did criticism trigger defensive reactions? What beliefs about success and failure drove his perfectionist tendencies? How had his family's financial struggles shaped his relationship with risk and security? This self-investigation revealed that much of what he had considered his personality consisted of learned responses rather than essential characteristics. His need for others' approval, for instance, stemmed from childhood experiences where love and acceptance had seemed contingent upon academic and behavioral performance. His fear of financial instability reflected not rational assessment of current circumstances, but emotional echoes from a 12-year-old boy watching his family struggle with bankruptcy. The recognition that these patterns were learned rather than innate opened possibilities for conscious change. If these responses had been acquired through experience, they could potentially be modified through new experiences and deliberate practice. This realization forms the foundation of what psychologists call neuroplasticity-based interventions, therapeutic approaches that leverage the brain's capacity for change throughout life. Neuroplasticity research has revolutionized our understanding of personal transformation. Studies conducted at Harvard Medical School reveal that focused mental practice can literally rewire brain circuits within weeks, creating new neural pathways that support different emotional and behavioral responses. This research suggests that the process of destroying one's weak self is not metaphorical but involves actual structural changes in brain organization. The practice of emotional detachment serves as a catalyst for these neuroplastic changes. By creating space between stimulus and response, individuals can interrupt automatic patterns and consciously choose different responses. Over time, these new responses become integrated into neural networks, effectively overriding previous patterns and creating new default modes of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Marcus had experienced this neuroplastic transformation firsthand. Through years of meditation practice, cognitive reframing exercises, and deliberate exposure to challenging situations, he had literally rewired his brain's stress response systems. Where once criticism triggered immediate defensive reactions, he now experienced curiosity about the critic's perspective and information that might be useful for improvement. Where once uncertainty created anxiety and paralysis, he now felt excitement about possibilities and opportunities for creative problem-solving. This transformation did not occur overnight or without significant effort. The process of neuroplastic change requires what neuroscientists call effortful attention, sustained, focused mental practice that gradually strengthens new neural pathways while allowing unused pathways to atrophy. Like physical exercise that builds muscular strength through repeated stress and recovery, psychological transformation requires repeated practice of new mental and emotional patterns under increasingly challenging circumstances. The concept of destroying one's weak self also involves developing what positive psychologists term psychological capital, a combination of self-efficacy, optimism, hope, and resilience that enables individuals to thrive in challenging circumstances. Research conducted at the University of Nebraska reveals that individuals with high psychological capital demonstrate superior performance in academic, professional, and personal domains while maintaining better physical and mental health outcomes. Self-efficacy represents confidence in one's ability to execute behaviors necessary for achieving specific goals. Unlike general self-esteem, which involves global evaluations of self-worth, self-efficacy focuses on specific competencies and capabilities. Marcus had developed high self-efficacy through deliberately seeking challenging assignments and systematically building competencies that expanded his professional capabilities. Each successful navigation of difficult circumstances strengthened his confidence in his ability to handle future challenges. Optimism, in the psychological capital framework, refers not to naive positivity, but to realistic assessment of one's ability to influence outcomes through effort and strategy. Optimistic individuals understand that setbacks are temporary, specific to particular circumstances, and responsive to personal action rather than permanent, pervasive, and unchangeable. This optimistic explanatory style enables resilience in the face of adversity and persistence in pursuing long-term goals. Hope, as defined by positive psychology research, involves agency, belief in one's capability to initiate and sustain actions toward goals, combined with pathways thinking, ability to generate multiple routes to desired outcomes. Hopeful individuals maintain motivation even when initial strategies prove ineffective because they can envision alternative approaches to achieving their objectives. Resilience encompasses the capacity to recover from setbacks, adapt to changing circumstances, and grow stronger through adversity. Resilient individuals view challenges as opportunities for development rather than threats to be avoided, maintain perspective during difficult periods, and utilize support systems effectively while maintaining personal agency and responsibility. The development of psychological capital requires systematic attention to building these four components through deliberate practice and conscious choice. Marcus had cultivated self-efficacy by gradually taking on increased responsibilities and learning from both successes and failures. He developed optimism by practicing cognitive reframing techniques that helped him identify controllable factors in challenging situations. He built hope by developing comprehensive strategic planning skills and maintaining flexibility in his approaches to goal achievement. He strengthened resilience by deliberately exposing himself to controlled stresses and developing effective recovery and adaptation strategies. The process of destroying one's weak self also requires developing what the ancient Stoics called preferred indifference, the ability to distinguish between what is truly important and what merely appears important due to social conditioning or emotional reactivity. Most individuals invest enormous emotional energy in outcomes that have little lasting significance, while neglecting factors that profoundly impact their long-term well-being and effectiveness. Epictetus taught that external circumstances, other people's opinions, material possessions, social status, and even physical health represent indifference because they lie largely beyond direct control. While some indifference may be preferred, health over sickness, approval over disapproval, attachment to specific outcomes in these areas creates vulnerability and emotional instability. True strength emerges from focusing attention and energy on factors within direct control: thoughts, values, attitudes, and responses to circumstances. This Stoic framework had proven invaluable in Marcus's professional development. Early in his career, he had expended significant emotional energy seeking approval from supervisors, colleagues, and subordinates. He took criticism personally, felt devastated by professional setbacks, and allowed others' moods and opinions to dictate his emotional state. The recognition that others' opinions represented preferred indifference freed him to focus on factors within his control: the quality of his work, the development of his skills, and the alignment of his actions with his values. The practical application of this principle involved developing what psychologists call internal locus of control, the belief that outcomes result primarily from personal actions and decisions rather than external forces beyond one's influence. Research consistently demonstrates that individuals with internal locus of control achieve higher levels of academic and professional success, maintain better physical and mental health, and report greater life satisfaction compared to those who attribute outcomes primarily to external factors. However, internal locus of control must be balanced with realistic assessment of one's actual sphere of influence. Individuals who attempt to control genuinely uncontrollable factors often experience frustration and burnout. The key lies in developing accurate discernment about what can and cannot be influenced through personal action, then directing energy toward areas where effort can produce meaningful results. Marcus had learned this discernment through years of experience and reflection. When facing organizational challenges beyond his direct control, economic downturns, regulatory changes, competitive pressures, he focused on adapting his strategies and responses rather than wasting energy on frustration about circumstances he could not change. When interpersonal conflicts arose, he concentrated on his own communication and behavior rather than attempting to control others' reactions or decisions. The process of destroying one's weak self ultimately involves transcending what Buddha called the illusion of the separate self, the belief that one's identity, security, and happiness depend upon external circumstances remaining favorable. This illusion creates constant vulnerability because external circumstances inevitably change, often in ways beyond personal control. Individuals who derive their sense of self-worth, security, and happiness from external factors live in perpetual anxiety about potential threats to their sources of identity and satisfaction. The alternative involves developing what spiritual traditions call unconditional well-being, a state of inner stability that remains intact regardless of external circumstances. This does not mean becoming indifferent to outcomes or withdrawing from worldly engagement. Instead, it means grounding one's sense of self in internal qualities, character, values, consciousness itself, rather than external achievements or conditions. Research in contemplative neuroscience reveals that individuals who regularly practice meditation and other contemplative disciplines develop increased activity in brain regions associated with well-being and decreased reactivity in areas associated with stress and anxiety. These changes persist even during challenging circumstances, suggesting that contemplative practice can create genuine resilience rather than mere temporary stress relief. Marcus had experienced this unconditional well-being during the most challenging period of his career. While implementing the company restructuring, he faced intense criticism from employees, negative media coverage, and pressure from board members who questioned his decisions. Yet, beneath the stress and concern about outcomes, he maintained a deeper sense of stability and clarity that enabled him to continue making decisions based on his best judgment rather than reactive attempts to reduce external pressure. This stability had not emerged from emotional numbing or disconnection, but from recognizing that his essential worth and well-being did not depend upon others' approval or even upon the ultimate success of his strategies. He had learned to distinguish between his identity, the conscious awareness that observes thoughts, emotions, and circumstances, and the various roles, achievements, and characteristics that others might use to define him. The destruction of the weak self, therefore, involves not eliminating aspects of personality, but transcending identification with limiting patterns while preserving and strengthening qualities that serve authentic expression and effective action. This process requires enormous courage because it involves releasing familiar sources of identity and security without guarantee that new sources will emerge to replace them. However, individuals who successfully navigate this transformation often discover that their authentic capabilities and resources far exceed what their limited self-concepts had suggested. Marcus found that releasing his need for constant approval actually increased others' respect for his judgment and leadership. Letting go of his fear of failure enabled him to take calculated risks that produced extraordinary results. Transcending his perfectionist tendencies allowed him to delegate effectively and develop his team's capabilities. The process resembles what metallurgists call refining, heating metal to extremely high temperatures to separate pure elements from impurities and alloys. The weak self represents the impurities, fear-based patterns, limiting beliefs, and reactive tendencies that diminish the strength and value of the pure metal. The heat of challenging circumstances and deliberate practice creates conditions where these impurities can be identified and eliminated, leaving behind increasingly pure and valuable material. As Marcus presented the quarterly results to the board that afternoon, he embodied the principles he had spent years developing. His confidence derived not from the favorable numbers on the screen, but from his knowledge that he had made decisions based on careful analysis, ethical principles, and long-term thinking, rather than fear or desire for approval. His composure reflected not emotional suppression, but genuine equanimity born from years of inner work and conscious development. The applause from board members felt pleasant but not necessary for his sense of accomplishment or self-worth. The success of the restructuring validated his strategic thinking, but did not define his identity or determine his happiness. He had learned to receive both praise and criticism as information rather than verdicts on his fundamental worth, success and failure as temporary outcomes rather than permanent definitions of his capabilities. This transformation had not made him cold or calculating, but had freed him to respond to circumstances with wisdom rather than reactivity, compassion rather than neediness, and strength rather than defensive posturing. He had discovered that destroying his weak self had not eliminated his humanity, but had revealed more authentic and powerful aspects of his nature that had been obscured by limiting patterns and beliefs. The rain that had fallen 3 years earlier had nourished growth that was now bearing fruit in ways he could not have anticipated. The difficult decisions that had seemed so challenging at the time had created space for innovation, efficiency, and renewed organizational vitality. The criticism he had faced had strengthened his capacity for independent judgment and moral courage. The uncertainty he had navigated had expanded his tolerance for ambiguity and his skill in strategic thinking. Looking back, Marcus recognized that the process of transformation was ongoing rather than completed. Each new challenge would provide opportunities for further refinement, deeper understanding, and more sophisticated responses. The weak self was not destroyed once and for all, but required continuous attention to prevent old patterns from re-establishing themselves under new circumstances. Yet the foundation of strength he had built through years of deliberate practice and conscious development provided stability and confidence that no external circumstance could ultimately threaten. He had learned that true security comes not from controlling external conditions, but from developing internal resources that can respond effectively to whatever circumstances may arise. This understanding formed the basis for the final phase of his transformation, learning to integrate emotional detachment with genuine warmth and authentic connection with others. Part 3. The Integration of Wisdom and Compassion. The executive retreat was scheduled for a mountain lodge 3 hours from the city, where Marcus would spend the next 3 days with his senior leadership team discussing the company's 5-year strategic vision. As he packed for the trip, he reflected on how profoundly his approach to leadership and relationships had evolved since mastering the principles of emotional detachment and personal transformation. The journey had led him to understand that true strength lay not in isolation or in vulnerability, but in the sophisticated integration of wisdom and compassion, detachment and engagement, strategic thinking, and genuine care for others' well-being. Dr. Susan Martinez, a researcher specializing in leadership psychology at the Wharton School, had spent 15 years studying executives who successfully balanced analytical decision-making with authentic interpersonal connection. Her research revealed that the most effective leaders demonstrated what she termed integrated intelligence, The capacity to access both emotional and rational processing systems while remaining grounded in ethical principles and genuine concern for stakeholders' welfare. This integrated approach transcended the false dichotomy often presented between emotional engagement and strategic thinking. Rather than viewing emotions as obstacles to clear decision-making, leaders with integrated intelligence understood emotions as important information sources that, when properly processed through conscious awareness, could inform more comprehensive and effective strategies. Marcus had discovered this integration gradually, recognizing that his early attempts at emotional detachment, while necessary for breaking free from reactive patterns, had sometimes created unnecessary distance from colleagues and subordinates. He learned that emotional detachment, when taken to an extreme, could become another form of defense mechanism, a way of avoiding the vulnerability inherent in authentic human connection. The evolution beyond mere detachment required developing what Buddhist psychology calls compassionate awareness, the ability to witness others' experiences with empathy while maintaining the perspective and emotional stability necessary for helpful response. This capacity allows individuals to feel genuine concern for others' welfare without becoming overwhelmed by others' emotional states or sacrificing their own clarity and judgment. Research in interpersonal neuroscience reveals that empathy involves multiple brain systems working in coordination. Mirror neurons allow us to automatically resonate with others' emotional states, while the anterior cingulate cortex processes the emotional significance of social interactions. However, effective empathic response also requires prefrontal cortex regulation to maintain perspective and generate appropriate behavioral responses, rather than simply mirroring others' emotional states. Individuals skilled in compassionate awareness can access empathic resonance while maintaining what researchers call self-other distinction, the ability to experience concern for others without losing awareness of their own emotional state and perspective. This capacity prevents the emotional contagion that often overwhelms well-intentioned individuals in helping professions, while preserving genuine care and motivation to provide assistance. Marcus had developed this balance through years of practice in progressively challenging interpersonal situations. When conducting performance reviews with struggling employees, he learned to simultaneously acknowledge his genuine concern for their professional development and personal welfare while maintaining clear expectations and accountability measures. When mediating conflicts between team members, he could empathize with each person's perspective without losing sight of organizational objectives and the need for resolution. The key insight that facilitated this integration was recognizing that compassion and strategic effectiveness often align rather than conflict. When individuals feel genuinely understood and cared for, they typically respond with increased trust, cooperation, and effort. When leaders make decisions based on comprehensive consideration of stakeholders' welfare, rather than narrow self-interest, they often generate more sustainable and broadly beneficial outcomes. Dr. James Collins, author of influential research on organizational excellence, identified this principle in his studies of companies that achieved sustained superior performance over decades. These organizations were led by what he termed Level 5 leaders. Individuals who combined fierce professional will with personal humility, strategic focus with genuine care for employees' development, and ambitious goals with ethical decision-making processes. Level 5 leaders demonstrated many characteristics consistent with integrated emotional intelligence. They made decisions based on factual analysis while considering human impact. They maintained long-term perspective while responding compassionately to immediate concerns. And they pursued ambitious objectives while developing others' capabilities and well-being. These leaders had learned to transcend the ego-driven needs that often compromise decision-making quality, while maintaining strong motivation for organizational success and stakeholder welfare. The retreat setting provided an ideal laboratory for observing these principles in action. Away from the daily pressures and distractions of the office environment, Marcus could focus on deeper strategic questions while building stronger relationships with his leadership team. He had learned that effective leadership required not just making good decisions, but creating conditions where others could contribute their best thinking and highest capabilities. During the first evening's dinner, Marcus facilitated a discussion about each leader's personal values and how those values connected to their professional responsibilities. Rather than viewing this as irrelevant to business strategy, he had learned that alignment between personal values and organizational objectives creates sustainable motivation and ethical decision-making that serves long-term success. Sarah Kim, his Chief Technology Officer, shared her commitment to innovation and continuous learning, explaining how these values drove her dedication to developing her team's technical capabilities while pursuing cutting-edge solutions for customer challenges. David Rodriguez, the head of human resources, discussed his belief in human potential and dignity, describing how these principles guided his approaches to performance management, organizational development, and employee welfare programs. As each leader shared their core values and professional motivations, Marcus observed the subtle but important shift in group dynamics. The conversation moved beyond surface-level professional interactions toward more authentic connection and mutual understanding. This deeper level of relationship would prove invaluable during strategic discussions where diverse perspectives and honest feedback would be essential for developing optimal solutions. Research in organizational psychology demonstrates that teams with higher levels of psychological safety, the belief that team members can express ideas, concerns, and mistakes without fear of negative consequences, generate more creative solutions and make better decisions than teams focused primarily on harmony or efficiency. However, psychological safety requires leaders who can model vulnerability while maintaining competence, openness while maintaining direction, and support while maintaining standards. Marcus had learned to create psychological safety through his own modeling of integrated intelligence. When discussing strategic challenges, he openly acknowledged uncertainties and areas where his expertise was limited, inviting input from team members with relevant knowledge and experience. When addressing performance issues, he combined clear expectations with genuine interest in understanding obstacles and providing necessary support. When making difficult decisions, he explained his reasoning process while remaining open to feedback and alternative perspectives. This approach required transcending what psychologists call impression management, the tendency to present oneself in ways designed to create favorable impressions rather than communicate authentically. Early in his career, Marcus had invested enormous energy in appearing confident, knowledgeable, and in control at all times. He had gradually learned that this defensive posture often prevented him from accessing others' knowledge and expertise while creating interpersonal distance that limited his effectiveness as a leader. The shift from impression management to authentic presence represented a profound transformation in his relationship with vulnerability. Rather than viewing uncertainty or limitations as weaknesses to be hidden, he learned to treat them as opportunities for learning, collaboration, and growth. This perspective enabled him to build stronger teams, make better decisions, and create more innovative solutions to complex challenges. During the second day of the retreat, the leadership team tackled the most challenging strategic question facing the company: whether to acquire a smaller competitor that would provide access to new markets but require significant integration effort and cultural adjustment. The decision involved complex financial analysis, market assessment, operational planning, and organizational development considerations. Marcus facilitated the discussion using principles he had learned from both his business training and his years of inner development work. He began by establishing clear criteria for decision-making, ensuring that all relevant factors, financial returns, strategic positioning, employee impact, customer benefit, and cultural fit, would receive appropriate consideration. He encouraged each team member to present their analysis and recommendations while challenging assumptions and exploring potential risks and opportunities. Throughout the discussion, Marcus maintained the perspective and emotional stability he had cultivated through years of practice, while remaining genuinely open to his colleagues' expertise and insights. When Sarah raised concerns about potential technology integration challenges, he explored her analysis thoroughly rather than dismissing the concerns due to his own enthusiasm for the strategic benefits. When David questioned whether the acquisition would require layoffs that conflicted with the company's commitment to employee welfare, Marcus ensured that this ethical dimension received serious consideration in the decision-making process. The quality of the discussion exceeded what Marcus had experienced in previous strategic planning sessions. Team members felt safe to express concerns, challenge assumptions, and propose alternative approaches because they trusted that their input would be considered thoughtfully rather than dismissed defensively. The combination of rigorous analysis with authentic interpersonal engagement generated more comprehensive understanding of the acquisition's implications and more robust strategies for successful implementation. Research in decision-making psychology reveals that groups often make better decisions than individuals when they can access diverse perspectives while avoiding common pitfalls such as groupthink, confirmation bias, and social pressure toward premature consensus. However, these benefits require skillful facilitation that encourages authentic expression while maintaining focus on objectives and standards of evidence. Marcus had learned these facilitation skills through years of conscious practice and feedback from colleagues and executive coaches. He discovered that his emotional detachment, rather than creating coldness or distance, actually enabled him to remain curious and open during challenging discussions. Because he was not emotionally invested in being right or maintaining a particular image, He could genuinely consider alternative viewpoints and modify his positions based on new information or insights. The third day of the retreat focused on implementation planning and organizational development strategies to support the company's growth objectives. This discussion revealed another dimension of integrated intelligence, the ability to balance strategic vision with practical execution, ambitious goals with realistic timelines, and organizational needs with individual development opportunities. Marcus worked with his team to develop detailed plans that would challenge the organization to grow while providing necessary support and resources for success. They designed communication strategies that would build enthusiasm and commitment, while honestly addressing potential difficulties and uncertainties. They created development programs that would expand employees' capabilities while respecting their current responsibilities and personal circumstances. This planning process required sophisticated integration of multiple perspectives and considerations. Financial projections needed to accommodate human learning curves and emotional adjustment periods. Operational efficiency goals needed to include time for relationship building and cultural integration. Performance expectations needed to challenge growth while maintaining psychological safety and job satisfaction. The complexity of these considerations illustrated why emotional intelligence has become increasingly recognized as essential for effective leadership in modern organizations. Technical expertise and analytical skills, while necessary, are insufficient for navigating the human dimensions of organizational change and development. Leaders must be able to understand and work with human motivation, fear, aspiration, and capability in order to create conditions where individuals and groups can perform at their highest levels. As the retreat concluded, Marcus reflected on how profoundly his understanding of strength and effectiveness had evolved. His early career had been driven by the belief that success required invulnerability, independence, and emotional control. He had gradually learned that true strength emerged from vulnerability integrated with wisdom, interdependence balanced with autonomy, and emotional awareness combined with conscious choice. The phrase, "the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," had initially suggested to him a process of elimination, removing weaknesses to achieve invulnerability. He now understood it as a process of integration, transforming limiting patterns into conscious capabilities, fears into wisdom, and defensive reactions into compassionate responses. The weak self that needed to be destroyed was not his capacity for emotion, connection, or vulnerability, but his unconscious identification with limiting beliefs, reactive patterns, and external dependencies that prevented him from accessing his full potential. The strong self that emerged from this process was not invulnerable to external circumstances, but was grounded in internal resources that could respond effectively to any situation while maintaining integrity, compassion, and clarity. This understanding had profound implications for his relationships both within and beyond the professional sphere. His marriage had deepened as he learned to be present with his wife's emotions without needing to fix her problems or defend himself from her concerns. His relationship with his teenage daughter improved as he learned to provide guidance and support without trying to control her choices or protect her from all disappointments. His friendships became more authentic as he released the need to maintain particular images or roles in favor of genuine connection and mutual support. The integration of emotional detachment with compassionate engagement had not made his life easier in the conventional sense. He still faced difficult decisions, interpersonal conflicts, and uncertain outcomes. However, he approached these challenges with resources and perspectives that enabled him to navigate them more skillfully, while maintaining his values and well-being in the process. The mountain setting of the retreat provided a powerful metaphor for this integration. From the peaks, one could see vast landscapes and distant horizons, gaining perspective that revealed patterns and possibilities invisible from ground level. Yet the peaks themselves were nourished by rivers and streams that flowed through valleys where communities thrived and life flourished in all its complexity and beauty. Similarly, the perspective gained through emotional detachment and personal transformation enabled broader vision and clearer decision-making. But this perspective served its highest purpose when integrated with engagement in the valleys of human experience, the relationships, challenges, and opportunities that give life meaning and provide opportunities for service and growth. As Marcus drove back to the city, he carried with him not just strategic plans and implementation timelines, but renewed appreciation for the ongoing nature of personal development and the endless possibilities for integrating wisdom with compassion, but strength with service, and effectiveness with authentic human connection. The journey of destroying the weak self had revealed not a destination, but a way of traveling, conscious, purposeful, and always open to the next opportunity for growth and contribution. The man who had begun this journey seeking invulnerability had discovered something far more valuable: the capacity to remain open and engaged with life, while maintaining the inner resources necessary to respond to whatever circumstances might arise with wisdom, courage, and genuine care for the welfare of all those whose lives he touched. This was not the cold detachment of withdrawal, but the warm presence of someone who had learned to love without neediness, to lead without controlling, and to achieve without losing sight of what truly mattered in the brief and precious opportunity of human existence. The rain had stopped falling, but its gifts continued to nourish growth that would benefit not just Marcus but everyone whose life intersected with his. The integration of cold minds and warm hearts had created something new, a way of being in the world that honored both the necessity of clear thinking and the irreplaceable value of genuine human connection. This was the true alchemy of personal transformation, not the elimination of humanity, but its refinement into its most powerful and beneficial expression.